I'm going to be talking to Jenny Yeremiy, who is a Calgary scientist and also a parent, and she's recently launched a recall campaign against the Alberta Minister of Education, who is her MLA. So we're going to talk to her about that and find out what's going on. So welcome to the interview, Jenny.
Thank you for having me, Markham. It's nice to see you.
Well, likewise. And before we get started, I have to declare a conflict of interest. My daughter is a teacher in the Calgary Board of Education. My son-in-law, her husband, is also an employee of the CBE in the administrative side. So I have a little family. Uh, you know, we're in the game, as they say. Just declare that up front. So Jenny, give us an overview of what your campaign is about.
Yeah, so I put in an application to recall Demetrios Nicolaides on October 7th. I am a parent, as you said. I have two boys that have gone through the Calgary Board of Education, and my youngest is in grade 11. My both of them have actually suffered from, heat exhaustion in their classrooms. My 18-year-old son threw up in his class last year because of the overcrowding and just well, the heat, we are getting warmer in these schools and we're not accommodating them. So that's one reason. But a major reason is because back in, I worked in the oil and gas industry for 22 years, and it became apparent that the work I was doing, so I was working in liability, the cleanup of oil and gas sites, and it became apparent that the work wasn't being honored, respected. Instead, things like carbon capture and storage were being pursued instead. And so I walked away from the industry. In fact, I feel like I was pushed out. And from that, I have learned that the misinformation that I received in the industry is not just limited to me. It's something that is perpetuated through the public, but most importantly, through the education system. So I was informed of this, and I went to his office in early 2024 and explained to him. And I noticed all the paraphernalia, I love oil and gas stuff in his office. And I explained the backstory, and I said, and I noticed he wasn't taking notes. And I said, you must have the scientific information to tell us that we must, stop expanding fossil fuel production. What are you going to do with this? And he said, I get my direction from above, and eventually told me to leave his office and not come back. So fast forward a year, a study came out. One of somebody I work with, Claire Kratz for Our Kids, they did a study about 39 companies that are infiltrating the education system. So in that time, I've been looking at every avenue to try and do something about this government. It doesn't matter, even, this study obviously has fallen on deaf ears, but everything has fallen on deaf ears. The Alberta Teachers Association's recommendations, ASCA, which is the Parent Student Council, has made recommendations that this government just ignores. So I finally, after attending the biggest rally in Alberta's history, I submitted an application to recall him.
Well, that's very interesting because one of the complaints, I mean, the teachers have many complaints, and these are fairly well known. Very high class sizes, maybe 35 or 40, and the facilities are not up to snuff, and they haven't had a pay raise in years and years and years and years, and so on and so forth. But what struck me about your story about meeting with Minister Nicolaides is I don't think I've ever heard of a politician telling a constituent, get out of my office and don't come back just because they disliked, what you had to say.
Yeah, and that's just it. This is a government that doesn't do anything that a normal government would do. This healthcare scandal, for example, people would resign over these things, and that's not happening. So is a lot of very open, corrupt things that are occurring, a clear siphoning of public funds towards private and charter school programs that don't have to declare the way they spend money. They can limit the classroom sizes, and this has exasperated the public system tremendously. So yes, more complexity, more students in classrooms. My son said his hallways are insane between classes. It's impossible to get to class on time. And I just heard that they had to actually increase the number of stairwells in a high school in Calgary because they have so many people in there that they don't meet fire code. So yeah, lots of big reasons. And attending these rallies, hearing the teachers just say, I can't give anymore. And this is a group of people that I know give and give beyond what their hours dictate for them. spend their own personal money to help students. And it just, you can't do that. At some point, it's just too much, and it's not fair to be set up for failure.
Yeah, it seems like what's happened here is that the government, one of the criticisms, of course, is that it provides extra funding to charter schools, to private schools, while it's starving the public system. And that was that part of your critique?
Yeah, absolutely. So I spoke about the oversized classrooms, the increased complexity of students that aren't being addressed, the lack of support, that they've actually decreased the amount of support that have gone into the classrooms. They've also decreased the funding per student that have gone into classrooms since COVID. And the result is that, teachers are just, like I said, set up for failure, and our kids are being impacted by this. My son has been watching this all along, and he's glad that they have gone on strike.
Now, for viewers who aren't familiar with how the recall process works, explain maybe the mechanics of how this is going to play out.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I submitted, as I said, officially on the 7th. I received receipt on the 14th. So that means I've got at most 3 weeks until this recall can go. I'm going to do my best to try and get people to submit their Canvas application ahead of time, and hopefully Halloween night could be well, I'm planning on Halloween night being a launch regardless, just to give information. But if we can, we would be collecting signatures that night. So it's limited though. So you cannot canvass if you live outside Calgary-Bow. So I'll list the communities that are in Calgary-Bow here for you. But so if you're in Bowness, Crestmont, Cougar Ridge, Coach Hill, Greenbrier, Mount Montgomery, Patterson, Wentworth, West Springs, Wildwood, and Valley Ridge. Those are the communities that can canvass. But as we've learned from the Forever Canadian campaign, the more hands on deck, the better. So,
So, yeah, if this is like the Forever Canadian campaign, then people have to register with Elections Alberta so that they can collect signatures. And I guess in this particular case, there are restrictions on where they're allowed to reside. They have to be within the Calgary-Bow constituency. And so, how many signatures are you required to recall Nicolaides?
yeah, so we need at least 16,000 signatures. So the legislation that they updated is 60% of the number of people who voted in the 2023 election, which amounts to, I think it's 16,006 voters. But of course, as we've learned from Forever Canadian, we have to have a buffer. So really, we need to be looking at about 17,200 signatures. And just for reference, Nicolaides was elected with just under 16,000 votes.
And do you have any idea what the percentage of the total vote that was?
Yeah, I want to say it was just below 60%, somewhere, yeah, in the high 50s.
Okay, so you've got your work cut out for you. And what about the other organizations that joined you in launching the campaign? Alberta Resistance, SOS Alberta, For Our Kids, and Public Interest Alberta.
Yeah, so really happy to have their support. Just, their understanding that this is a non-functional, it's a situation that cannot continue. So I'm really proud that Support Our Students joined and Public Interest Alberta have joined. So they've said that they're going to help us campaign. They have over 300,000 members across the province. So helping dedicate some of their folks to supporting me in this. I certainly have gone to some of their events, and it's a wonderful experience. It's a great thing to stand up for what's right in this province. And so the one thing I want to say, if you don't live in Calgary-Bow, please don't take that as a no, do not participate. I've got on my website, which is recallnicolaides.ca, please sign up as a volunteer. You can be a buddy to a canvasser. I'm going to have a map or I do have a map set up just like the Forever Canadian campaign. So you can join somebody, sit with them, keep them company, and have some fun. We got to have some fun with this. That's how we'll do it.
Is this like the Forever Canadian campaign, which, by the way, we've done a couple of videos, interviews with Thomas Lukasik. You can find those under the political playlists on the Energy Media YouTube channel. So is it like that where you've got, you first of all, you register your signature collectors. Then they can go out and they have 3 months to collect as many signatures as they can. Is that how this works?
Yes, exactly. In our case, the recall legislation is slightly different in that, like, if there is another petition going around, by the way, I'm not sure if you know, but there's a parent and teacher, Alicia Taylor, that is doing a petition on to end private funding to or end public funding to private schools. That those changes went, so if it was the same as Lukasic's, it would have gone from 90 days to 120 days, while the recall campaign went from 60 days to 90 days. So yes, it's very similar in that I have 90 days to collect these signatures. And yes, like I said, I have a canvasser registration form. It's automatic, just like what the Forever Canadian folks did, so that you just go online, you digitally sign it. I also sign it. I send it to Elections Alberta, and Elections Alberta will automatically send you your credentials. And once you have those and the window is lifted, then we can start collecting signatures, and it'll just be a go time from there.
Okay, let's assume that you get 16,007 signatures that are verified by Elections Canada or Elections Alberta. What happens next?
So it would trigger a by-election, but I just learned that there is another recall that has already been called. And I was a member of, or I am a member of Alberta Resistance, and I understand that there are at least four or five other recalls in infancy, if you will. So if we get enough of these, if we're successful in at least five of these, then we could have a vote of non-confidence and trigger an early election.
If I understand this correctly, you probably in early November, if you're successful in getting, you'll then begin collecting signatures. That would then November, December, January, sometime in early February, the campaign would end.
Correct. Yeah. If we are successful in launching on the 31st of October, it would take us to the 31st of January. You bet.
Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, Jenny, aside from the fact that I know you and I appreciate the passion you bring to these kinds of issues. But today is an interesting day in our newsroom because earlier today I did a piece on Alberta Energy Minister Brian Jean. I just did another interview, which you can find on our YouTube channel, with Deirdre Mitchell-McLean, who's she writes a Substack. She's a freelance journalist, and then this one. And so energy, healthcare, and education. So three huge files in Alberta. And I think it's fair to say that what we're seeing is the mishandling of these three files. It is not as approached, it is incompetent. The way that this government is maybe, in my opinion, the worst government in the history of Canada. It is awful the way it conducts itself, and I see this reflected in your campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you on all of those files. It's clear that this government doesn't know how to govern, and they are just doing the agenda of their superiors, as they make clear, and which clearly is industry primarily. So when I mean the oil and gas industry primarily, and then private interests that aren't necessarily even Albertan. So yeah, it's very clear that there is a liquidation sale happening in Alberta with all of the assets that we've created over the years.
One the observation that I made when in my interview with Deirdre, and this comes from the Energy file, which is the one that Energy Media mostly reports on, and that is the outsized influence of political staffers. Because in the past, and we've been doing, we started in Calgary in 2008. We've been around for a while. We've seen, different governments. We saw a couple of PC governments, Stelmach and Redford. Then we saw Notley and the NDP from 2015 to 2019. But the level of political interference in various files that we see started with the Jason Kenney government. Now we're seeing it with the Danielle Smith UCP government. Is I think a lot of the problems is that it's political agendas and political staffers managing the files, so that instead of the experts, the civil servants, the people who know these files, and it's their job to manage the departments, are being kind of shunted to the side a little bit, and the political staffers are doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and therefore you get ideology, not expertise and experience and so on running the file. That's my observation. Would you agree or disagree with it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we sat in on I went to hear the chief of staff for Brian Jean speak to the mature asset strategy. And, he spoke for 45 minutes and it was all industry backed ideas. There was absolutely no mention of AER staff or Alberta government staff and their recommendations. It was very clear. I'll be specific. He was talking about a mature asset of one of the largest companies in Canada and explaining how it's, using tertiary methods. So that's, gas injection into it and that it's too expensive to operate. And so his logic was that we should give them a royalty break. And he said this to a room full of landowners, people that have derelict wells on their lands. And, without even skipping a beat, it's shocking the amount of outside influence that is driving government decisions in this province. And you're right, it's minimizing the people that have dedicated years to these files. And yeah.
There's a point here. Now, this is germane in energy because there are regulators and there's a lot of a body of academic research, for example, and the idea of a captured government, a captured regulator. And on the energy side, it's the Alberta Energy Regulator. And what that means is the politicians and maybe the regulator begin to conflate the interests of the public, which they are, hired or elected to represent, with the interests of the industry. Or in the case of education and health, maybe it's the case of private interests, who maybe they're political donors, maybe who knows? We don't know all of this. But it seemed the parallels between what I'm seeing in energy, where they clearly are captured. I mean, some of the scholars say, well, you know what, the Alberta Energy Regulator is like a textbook. We teach this stuff in class because it's so captured. But the principles behind it, and political interference, too much industry influence, who's working on whose behalf, that's the principle I think applies to both healthcare, education, and energy.
Right. Like I said, when Demetrios told me I get my direction from the premier, to me that is not looking to experts, that is not looking to his staff, that's not looking to anybody who is living the education crisis in this province. It is being driven from the top and not in the interests of our kids, of my kids, of your daughter, anybody who's impacted by this. So yeah, it's very clear. And you talk about capture. Yes, 100%. This is private interest capture throughout it doesn't matter their portfolio in our government. Clear. It's clear.
Yeah, I think this is an important point in that we have to begin to articulate and bring evidence to the table to make the argument, because it's I think we've had 3 years of Jason Kenney, then we had 3 years of Danielle Smith, so essentially 6 years of United Conservative Party government. We've seen how it operates. I've certainly interviewed enough experts across energy and other fields, and the level of incompetence is absolutely breathtaking. And I don't think, Albertans still, when they think of government, they think of the government they grew up with. Maybe it was a progressive conservative government, Ed Stelmach and Alison Redford, who were traditional Canadian style politicians, right? You could pop them into another province and you wouldn't notice that they were that much different. Jason Kenney and Danielle Smith in particular are more in the Trump mold. They are, and Trump, let's be very clear, is all about dismantling the administrative state, dismantling government to privatize it and open it up to private interests. And there's lots of scholarship, and you can see the interviews that I've done about that on our YouTube channel. And it seems like Alberta is the Canadian version of that path.
Yes. Project 2025. we have been the testing ground for Project 2025. The same aspects of appointing unelected officials to making decisions as you're describing, firing government employees and making more private employees. All of these ways that these experts and everything that are being undermined is all it seems to have been a playbook that was used in Alberta and is now playing out in the States. And I want to say something to what you talked about is a lot of Albertans have a tendency to trust our government automatically. A friend of mine said it perfectly, which is reverence. We give reverence to these leaders that we think that they have our best interest in mind, and we automatically assume they're doing what's best for us. We cannot assume that anymore. It is very clear, like you said, the evidence is out there on the daily. The insulting behavior of after teachers have walked away from their students. I saw a principal in tears at one of these rallies because he had to walk away from their students. And the next day, the government comes out and announces that they're going to study another a pipeline that they've studied 4 or 5 years prior, maybe even 10 years prior. And then now they're looking at license plates, changing our license plates. Wild Rose country isn't appropriate anymore. We have to be strong and free. Like these are things that are just not just a distraction. They are meant to make us feel like we do not are what we think and what we are doing does not matter, that their agenda is happening no matter what. And people need to wake up to that. We cannot accept anymore that we can't live under the assumption that these people are operating in our best interests at all. They show us every day.
Well, we'll wrap up the interview this way, Jenny, and I want to observe that there are people like Charlie Angus, the former member of Parliament, who are arguing that the Trump MAGA culture of being of dismantling government and making it ineffective and unable to operate the way, to deliver services, starve it of resources, fire the civil servants, these kinds of things. This appears to be the template in Alberta. And it's become so obvious now. We've had 6 years of it. We can begin to see the signs of it. And Jenny, we're going to check in with you in a couple months, see how your campaign is doing. So good luck with it, and thank you very much for this.
Thank you so much, Markham.